Welcome to the show Gold Squadron Gays. It's the podcast where two Star Wars loving gays talk about and review their favorite Star Wars content while also being gay as hell. I'm your host, Bradley Brower.
I'm your other host, Charles Rogers, and Bradley and I were just trying to work out off mic who the best and worst voices for Darth Plagueis we could think of could be. That's what we've been reduced to now as human people. And you will find out maybe the answers to those questions when we cover the Acolyte in 18 million years. Lord in heaven. I am getting a lot of questions about when we're going to cover the Acolyte. Bad Batch, Tales of the Empire, the Acolyte. That's the order.
There you go.
So sometime around September, we will start getting to the Acolyte. Hopefully we will have season 2 news by then.
That would be actually the best thing possible, honestly. The later we push the Acolyte, hopefully by the time we actually start recording it, we can be like, well, I mean, they're getting a season 2, so it's great.
Here's the problem that I eternally run into with covering these shows, is that I feel like our coverage of a show gets better the further from the show we are. So the trade-off to the episodes being better is that we're not capitalizing on that, like, bandwagon of doing content for a show when it's actually coming out. That's the trade-off that we eternally... That's been the big experiment this year, is because we've had to do all the shows after the fact because we got thrown off by the SAG-AFTRA strike. So, side note, the voice actors for SAG-AFTRA are now on strike. They just went on strike. Now, I will shout out SAG-AFTRA here, number one, because yay strike. We love that. But also, when they went on strike, they wrote this beautiful multi-section FAQ on their website addressing every single possible point anyone could have possibly had about the strike. Because the nature of the strike is different.
Right.
So what they're asking people to do for solidarity is different, and then what members specifically can and cannot do is different. It's not necessarily as much against companies from what I'm getting this time around. It is, but there's also like some projects that they can promote and some projects that they can't work on or promote. It's a whole complicated thing. But my point is, SAG-AFTRA has got this whole beautiful FAQ this time around. And right at the bottom of the FAQ, from day one, they have the question, should I be streaming or making content about the video games being struck? The question's right there. The answer's right below it. The answer is yes, you can still make content. They want you to. They want you to talk about the VAs. That's from the SAG-AFTRA site. So shout out to SAG-AFTRA for anticipating what people are going to be asking this time around. And also, it's a good move because trying to get video game streamers to stop video game streaming is impossible.
I was going to say, that doesn't sound like something that would ever really happen.
No. No, that's not going to happen because it's such a big industry, and because the degree of people who make their money from video game streaming specifically it's a different sort of economy than people who make content for visual media like film and TV.
Right.
So it's a different situation that requires a different strategy, and using those voices to help amplify what the VAs are asking, that's a really wise move, I think, on my part. But I don't have the time here in this episode to sit and talk about my Dragon Age content on TikTok. I'm barely holding back not talking about the Veilguard on this show weekly. What are we talking about instead of?
This week, we're talking about The Bad Batch Season 3, Episode 12, Juggernaut. While seeking an unexpected source, the Batch must make a daring escape. Charles, what's one thing you liked about this episode and one thing you did not?
One thing I liked about this episode was that it was really well directed and the action was very fun to watch. The pacing was excellent. It was a short and sweet episode. It got in, got out. It didn't throw any real unnecessary complications. Something like a heist, which is what we're seeing in this episode. It would have been very easy for them to pad this out by another 5 minutes, just by introducing complications they had to deal with. And while there were definitely complications that they ran into, they didn't artificially pad that out. It was a great balance between things going right and things going wrong. One thing I didn't like is a specific moment early in the episode, and I'm going to talk about it when we get to it. What about you, Bradley? One thing you liked and one thing you didn't.
Oh, yeah. One thing I liked was I think it was just a pretty solid episode from start to finish. It just got in and got out. It didn't, you're right. It just didn't like really mess around too much. It wasn't like, oh no, the batch can't do something. So now we have to figure out something else to do. Like it was like, nah, they just do what they do best, which is, sticking to the plan or finding another plan if they need to. So I really liked the concisity of the episode, but it was pretty decent. What I didn't like about the episode was that I don't know if it was too much action. I think it was just like it was all to me, it felt like it was all action and then nothing else. It was just very much like nobody has any character growth whatsoever. No one makes any decisions that, change the plot really, other than like, let's get Rampart. Like, I really don't know what else like this episode was designed to do other than just get Rampart. That's it. That's literally all it was. Like, just it's one stepping stone to the finale. I really don't know what else it was other than that.
All right, you want to take us into section 1?
Section 1. We begin with CX2 and Omega landing at Tantus Base, where Dr. Hemlock greets them. He then orders to test Omega immediately for confirmation of her blood samples. Meanwhile, on Pabu, the batch hide as Imperial forces withdraw, and with Wrecker upset about Omega's surrender. Crosshair defends her actions. He later suggests finding the coordinates to Tantus Base from the imprisoned Vice Admiral Rampart, despite his reluctance to return there. Fee, Genoa, and AZI join the group, explaining how they arrived unseen through a secret tunnel and offer to help. Crosshair reveals that Rampart is at the Imperial labor camp on Erebus.
I just want to point out that the facial expressions on the animations on Omega and Emery are really good.
Okay.
Like, they've gotten really good at micro expressions.
Oh, micro expressions. Yeah. I believe.
Yeah, no, shout out to the animators, because this is a pretty incredible sequence of these two saying a lot with just their face, because Hemlock is right there.
Yeah, I wonder how, I don't know how animation works necessarily. I imagine they use reference a lot for like to make animations, but I wonder how they get those references. So I wonder if it's just like somebody in the studio who they're like, hey, can you do this for me kind of thing? Or if it's more like they hire somebody just for that, or they get the voice actors to kind of when they're recording.
They probably also have libraries
That's true.
of reference material that they can use. I know that with sound effects, I know that we have like libraries that we can pull from and things. And there's always like reference photos and things that you can get. Like if you're an artist, if you're a visual artist, there's a lot of reference photos you can get for like poses and things. But I also know that like sometimes artists will do their own. Like Jordan, who does the Beach House Studios cover art, she, particularly for the second one, will like have someone take photos of her standing in the position that she needs the photos to stand. And then she also, for that cover, like I think she actually used like fake blood and put it on herself so she could see how it would kind of splatter.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, Jordan does a lot of the art for me generally. She did the little cartoon people that you see on the cover. She has the Beach House Studios covers. She does a whole lot of art for Light and Dice. She did our old Gold Squadron TikTok art and all of that. She's very committed to her craft. She's not listening to this episode, but Jordan is very cool. But I do know that there's numerous different ways that they can get them. But I'm really impressed by how they translated the facial expressions on Emery and Omega. And then we're back to Pabu, and we spend so much time in the animation making Pabu look pretty.
I feel like we have to say this every single time.
Every single time. There's two things we're going to say every single time. Pabu looks fucking pretty, and the Kyners have popped off. There will be a moment later in this episode where the Kyners will once again pop off. But these are the two things we always say. Pabu looks gorgeous, and the Kyners popped off. We get into the scene, and this is the thing that I didn't like about the episode.
Ah, okay.
This was what could have been, I think, this episode was good. I think this is what could have made the episode great. And didn't, is that at the end of the last episode, Crosshair let Omega do her insane bullshit plan. And at the moment where it was crucial for him to succeed, his own inadequacies and his own head got in the way, and he failed to get the tracker on the ship. And this time around, the only acknowledgement we get of this at all in this episode is this moment right here where Wrecker and Crosshair kind of have their little exchange. where Wrecker's like, I can't believe you let her go. And Crosshair's like, well, they were going to destroy the planet. And then Wrecker kind of bemoans the situation. That's it. And I think that it would have been more interesting if we had seen either Crosshair reconciling with his own failure or Crosshair deciding to take them to Tantus because he's literally out of options, which kind of we get, but it doesn't quite hit the same. Or Wrecker and or Hunter having to grapple with the fact that Crosshair failed to put the tracker on the ship. Or the fact he didn't tell them. There's numerous ways you can go with this, but we're not really going to go any of those directions in this episode.
Yeah, I realize you're right. Yeah, he doesn't say it's my fault that the Omega's plan didn't work. Like, because it is his fault.
It is his fault.
So, and he doesn't say that. He just says, oh, well, her plan was to get captured, and otherwise they were going to blow Pabu up or whatever. And they're like, yeah, I know. That's probably probably a good idea, you know. But he leaves out the part that, no, sure, her backup plan was for him to track her. Like, so it's not, I get that her plan wasn't like 100% foolproof, but it's also kind of like you left that part out. And then now he's getting berated for a different reason, which is, oh, well, technically I know how to find Tantus, technically.
Yeah, and what gets me about the Bad Batch season 3 is a lot of these moments are like, it's good but not great, but you can see where like it could have been hit a little more emotionally resonantly if they had the time to do it. Which is not to say that the show is not emotional and does not have these character arcs, because that's a criticism I see. It absolutely does. They're absolutely there. But there's moments where they could have added that extra little bit of sauce to it. And this is one of those moments that I felt that they missed. Crosshair's failure to actually get the tracker on the ship and having to grapple with that. But instead we're just in like, we're in mission mode, which tracks for the batch. Like it makes sense for their characters. But for the audience, I was like, we ended on this big cliffhanger, this both emotional and technical, and we're going to solve the technical aspect of the cliffhanger, but not the emotional aspect.
Right. I think I needed Crosshair to take ownership of this mistake, and then I needed the batch to be in there like, okay, to prove that we have seen your change or whatever, that we forgive you or whatever. They'd be like, we get it, you failed. How are we going to make this right? Not, oh, you suck, like, for not getting the tracker on the ship. Like, we need him to be like, take ownership. I did not do part of my plan, or my part in the plan. And then they'd be like, okay, well, now what? And then he'd be like, okay, well, because I fucked up, I'm going to do something that I was never gonna want to do, which is I'm gonna go back to Tantus. And I think I know how we can do that.
Yeah, and it's sort of there. Like, you get the sense that he's only bringing up the fact that Rampart probably knows where Tantus is purely because they're out of options. But I felt like it could have hit harder. I felt like we could have done more with this scene that wasn't there. And then Fee shows up, the only emotionally mature person in this entire plot. Coming out of a secret tunnel, because of course Fee has a secret tunnel.
Of course she does.
Why not? And she's remains the only person who is emotionally mature in this plot by mentioning Tech by name.
Is this the first time? Or no, well, I guess
did Omega
say Tech's name last week?
Yeah, Omega said it all the way back in Shadows of Tantus.
Oh, she did. Okay. Mm-hmm. But she's the only person to say his name is Omega. No one else has.
Thus far, I don't. I think somebody mentioned it in the meeting in episode 5.
Okay.
I think it might have been Echo. It was Echo.
Okay.
Hunter, Crosshair, and Wrecker.
Echo is the only emotionally...
He's the only emotionally mature clone in the plot.
Yeah.
Well, I think it is interesting. And again, it's just things, it's like you can see what they were going for, but the sauce is kind of missing a little bit.
Yeah.
I think it's really interesting that the core batch, the original batch, which is to say Hunter, Crosshair, and Wrecker, never say Tech's name to my memory.
Right.
And only Omega, Echo, and Fee are all the ones who are comfortable saying his name out loud. And I think that could have gone somewhere interesting, or we could have hammered that home harder. We could have led that somewhere. We didn't, and that's just a background detail now at this point. And it's kind of frustrating to the viewer. But Fee shows up as basically like, oh yeah, Tech told me all about you, Crosshair. And I'm like, what did Tech say?
Yeah. What was his, like, he's like, oh yeah, that Crosshair, man. Like, he's got an attitude on him.
Yeah, and I do think it's interesting that Fee is like, yeah, any friend of Brown Eyes is a friend of mine. You know, she still respects Tech even in death. She's going to still take his recommendations seriously. And you also have to note too that this means that Tech spoke favorably of Crosshair to Fee, because Crosshair had not defected back to them when Tech died. He was still on Team Empire.
Right.
So I think that's an interesting retroactive character moment for Tech, that Tech told Fee about Crosshair and wasn't like, yeah, he's just the worst. He probably gave a very honest and frank analysis of Crosshair.
That's true. I guess out of anybody, Tech is the least emotional heavy person. So if you had asked Hunter or Wrecker like what they thought of Crosshair, they immediately would have been like, oh, well, he's with the Empire now. He's a traitor. So like we don't really, necessarily forgive him. But then Tech is like, well, he may be those things, but also he's really good at XYZ, so it's Tech's very matter of fact. So I guess it makes sense that she would trust his judgment of anything, really.
Yeah, because he's going to give you the unbiased facts as he sees them.
Right.
And they are going to have a slight bias to them because of their presentation, but I thought that was a retroactively nice little moment. Let's talk about the planet of Erebus.
Okay.
Erebus is not a planet we have seen before. However, the name sounded really familiar to me, so I went and looked it up. And it's because I've been playing a lot of Hades. An unbelievable amount of Hades. Just an ungodly amount. I want to fuck death so badly. So Bradley does this thing where if I say something completely out of pocket, his eyes don't roll like around. They roll back up into the back of his head for a minute and then come back down. And that's how I know I've said something that's either going to be cut out or is going to be the end clip. But because I've been playing so much Hades, I knew that Erebus was a region of the underworld in Greek mythology.
Okay.
So I went and looked up exactly what it meant. I'm quoting Wikipedia here, which references a couple of different sources in this, but I'm going to read out Wikipedia's description. Quote, the name Erebus is often used by ancient authors to refer either to the darkness of the underworld, to the underworld itself, or to the subterranean region through which souls of the dead travel to reach Hades, and it is sometimes used synonymously with Tartarus or Hades.
Okay.
End quote. So this name is not subtle.
It's like pit of death, basically.
It's a pit of death where souls pass through.
I guess, if you're going to name a labor camp something or like put it on a planet that's supposed to be a reference, I guess that's a pretty decent name for something.
Yeah, one thing I love about Star Wars is its complete lack of subtlety at all times.
Section 2. On Erebus, Rampart works in a mining facility, resenting his alien prison foreman. Meanwhile, aboard Fee's ship, she informs the Bad Batch of the labor camp's layout and warns about the guards and security systems. After a creative landing near the camp, the Bad Batch stuns 2 stormtroopers and accesses a terminal to locate Rampart. They learn he is scheduled for transport, and they plan to intercept him.
We get Imperial labor camps, which we first saw all the way back in Rogue One.
I was wondering if this was going to be like the same one, but obviously there's more than one.
It's not. That one was on Wobani. This one is on Erebus.
Right.
But it is cool to see them again. And also kind of impressive Rampart lived this long.
I'm surprised they didn't just execute him. It would have made Palpatine's life easier, no? Like if they just killed him?
I think they wanted him to suffer. And also like a public execution of a high-ranking military official like that, it's going to be bad press. Yeah. It's going to look bad. So it's like, we are rehabilitating him.
Okay.
We are using him for the betterment of the Empire, yada, yada, yada.
Right. He's still a prop.
We're not quite at the point where they can just go around executing people. We won't be there until A New Hope.
Got it.
Speaking of things we saw in Rogue One, we also got the... Jesus Christ, I'm going to read this entire thing out because it's ridiculous. The HCV WA-9 turbo tank.
Okay.
And that's capital H, capital C, capital V, lowercase w, capital A, 9 turbo tank.
Okay. I'd hate to know how many iterations of the turbo tank there are, but there you go.
I was working at my job in Tennessee when Last Jedi had come out, Rise of Skywalker was about to come out. And I had a little BB-8 that I used to stick in the window because I worked in a drive-through window. I had a little BB-8 that I used to stick in the window that was a good conversation starter with people. And this family rolls up and this kid is talking to me about Star Wars because he sees the BB-8. And so I'm processing what I need to process. for the customer and this kid's talking. And I mentioned like, oh yeah, you know, I think it was like around May 4th or something. I was like, yeah, I just got the walker, the giant walker from Last Jedi, you know, the like gorilla walker.
Right.
This kid cannot be more than 7 or 8 years old, spouts off the entire technical designation of the walker. And I went, you're going to have a Star Wars podcast someday.
I'm dealing with an expert here.
I'm dealing with someone. Well, because that's how kids do be, because kids like this type of stuff. That's a thing that I need people to understand. Kids love to learn if you give them a reason to want to do it. And for Star Wars fans, like, they love those reference books and stuff. They love reading things and finding out new pieces of information. And so I don't remember the turbo tank designation, but there's some kid out there who grew up in the Clone Wars era who really loves the turbo tanks and all of the different like clone stuff that they saw in the Clone Wars and read all the reference books, and they now know all this. So shout out to those kids. I do want to point out that they don't really discuss a plan here.
Okay.
And I'm bringing this up because the question that was in my head was, does this episode follow the heist rules? Which is to say, if you do not remember, the heist rules are that if you discuss the plan and then execute the plan will go off the rails. If you discuss the plan, intercut with your scenes of performing the plan, then the plan will succeed up until the point you stop intercutting the scenes together. If you don't discuss the plan and you just do the plan, then the plan will succeed. So I was looking to see, are they discussing a plan? And the answer is kind of not really.
Yeah, it's very like...
They have a starting point, which is
Right.
we're going to drop off and get the info. And
That's
an
it.
ending point, we're going to have Fee extract us. There's no plan here.
There's no in-between plan, yeah.
There is no plan. They make zero plans. They don't come up with the idea of getting him off the juggernaut until they get to the tower.
Yeah, it's really random. They're like, what are we gonna do?
Well, here's the thing. This is kind of how the Bad Batch works. This is why they have all 99 plans. Because instead of saying we're going to sit here and discuss a plan, they can get in, assess the situation, and go, Plan 72.
Right.
And then they execute Plan 72 for this given situation. That's the genius of the plans. That's why the plans exist. Because the Bad Batch has to be a mobile unit and an adaptable unit, they have these pre-packaged microwavable dinner plans that they can whip out when they don't feel like cooking something. That's how this works. All right, we got to talk about Fee's little drop the ship through the atmosphere with no power plan.
She said, I have a way.
And then she did the thing.
She had a way. She just didn't. She wasn't forthcoming with her plan, but she had a definite way to get past the sensors. That's for sure.
I'm trying to think if we've done this on For Light and Dice. Dropped a
Well,
ship
now you
through the
can.
atmosphere like this. Well, now I can. Now the idea's in my head because guess what, Bradley? I fly the ship.
Oh, well, there you go. Now you should
I play
actually
the
try
pilot.
to implement this the next time you guys play. You guys should try to implement this at some point in your game. Like, I'm curious to see if it would genuinely work. Like,
I think Chris would really like it. So here's the duality of Chris, right? Because I could see him going sick Bad Batch reference because he loves this show and allowing it because sick Bad Batch reference. However, he may also decide just to spite me that he's going to throw in complications. So this is the duality of Chris. We never know.
yeah, but if even if he doesn't like it or whatever, like, what if you roll your whatever, your 12 or whatever it is, wouldn't it work?
Technically that's how it's supposed to work, but Chris and I spend an inordinate amount of our lives finding specific and petty ways to fuck with each other.
Okay.
So I don't know. See, now I've backed Chris into a corner. Now it can go either way.
I like it. I think you should. Yeah, I think you should never tell him that you're gonna do it, and then just like Fee,
I'm just
like,
gonna
you should
randomly
just
do it.
hop it up. Yeah,
I'm
and
gonna
just be
do
like,
it. I'm gonna
yeah.
not tell him what I'm planning to do. I'm gonna give. This is what I'll do. I'll give him like ample clues that I'm about to try something like this.
Yeah.
And we'll see if he picks up on it. That's
like
what
it.
we'll do. Do you know what I really liked about this scene, Bradley? Obligatory second thing we have to say every episode.
I'm gonna go with the Kiner's music popped off.
The Kiner's music absolutely popped off.
I knew you were gonna say that.
Because they continue to be good at this, Bradley.
I know.
They've
It's
only
great.
been writing Star Wars music since 2006, 2007, whenever Clone Wars went into production. So this is a family business at this point, writing music for Star Wars.
Section 3. On Transport 1, Rampart is secured in a holding cell. The batch boards using grappling cables, setting off alarms. Inside, Wrecker knocks out the driver while Crosshair and Wrecker deal with the stormtroopers guarding the prisoners. Rampart recognizes Crosshair, and meanwhile, the batch releases the rest of the prisoners aboard the transport to distract the Empire. When asked about the location of Tantus, Rampart tries to bargain for his freedom, insisting he will only reveal the location of the base if they get him off-world.
I want to know why the co-pilot has to go check the alarms out. I don't
Hey,
know why
there's
we
an
can't
alarm
have
going
a
off.
guard do this.
Why don't they have droids? Like just
That's
a
a good
droid.
question.
Like just a random.
Why don't they
you know
have
what
an
I
exterior camera?
mean? Why don't they just have any kind of security cameras on the vehicle
Why don't they have
whatsoever?
like a fucking Waymo camera or something on the outside of it?
You
that
think
can
it would
turn
at least
on
have
and
a
see the
backup
roof?
camera because the thing is fucking huge.
Mhm.
But no, it doesn't.
How do they parallel park these things?
I don't know, honestly. Like, don't drive these in New York.
No, dude, don't drive these in LA.
Don't drive them anywhere,
I
honestly.
did really. Actually, I would drive one of these in LA. I feel like that would solve a lot of my problems with driving in LA. Is if I could just have a tank and I
Well,
could
yeah.
just plow through
plow.
LA traffic. It's a nice dream. We do get those awful like cyber trucks here though.
There's a bunch here in Atlanta, and it's not
We
cute.
get those and we get the Waymo cars.
I just started seeing those too.
This is the episode of digressions, by the way, because we're only 35 minutes into raw recording.
We're talking about vehicles, though.
We're talking about vehicles. This one time I was driving, I pulled up next to a Waymo car, kind of looked over, and I must have looked at it for 0.2 seconds too long. I immediately clocked what it was, and I just kind of looked around and I'm like, oh, that's interesting, and turned away. I look back over, and the gentleman in the back of the car has rolled down his window, is slapping the top of the car, gesturing wildly to me and pointing at the cameras. Like, he's got this massive shit-eating grin on his face. Like, he's so excited to show me the fact that there's no driver in the car because of the cameras. And I'm kind of looking over him like, yeah, I fucking know. I worked that out. I don't know why you've got a fucking boner for this. That you feel like you need to show me, like you think you're the coolest dude in the world because you're in a driverless car. Motherfucker, we live in LA. You know how many of these I've seen today?
Yeah.
And I'm sure these stormtroopers would also be excited if they were to have cameras on their juggernaut. But no, they have to send the co-pilot to go check it out.
Sure.
Sure, instead of one of the people guarding the prisoners.
That was weird to me because I'm like, all the prisoners are contained for the most part. So it's like just that you can't like sacrifice, I guess, the one of the guards to go look, I guess. But
because if you send the co-pilot, then what ends up happening is exactly what happens. You don't have adequate coverage in the cockpit,
right.
and someone is able to walk up, deliver a hilarious one-liner, and take over the cockpit, which is what Wrecker does. I love Wrecker's little, yep, that was so funny to me. I also love the dynamic between Rampart and Crosshair. I love gay petty sniping, as evidenced by my whole section earlier about Chris from Darkside Divas. By the way, you should absolutely be checking out both Darkside Divas and Holodeck Divas, their new show about Star Trek, which has gotten me to watch Star Trek, and also for Light and Dice. That was me plugging all of Chris's stuff for him. But yes, I love
petty gays.
Speaking of petty gay sniping, back around to Crosshair and Rampart, who spend a bunch of time petty gay sniping at each other.
I love that Rampart remembers his designation, first of all. His actual...
He doesn't know his fucking name. He thinks
knows...
that's his name.
Well, that's just showing his... What would you call racism towards clones? I don't know what that would be called.
Bigotry. I would just broadly call it bigotry towards the clones.
Oh, okay. Well, it shows his lack of humanization of the clones.
That's
first.
A good term.
But the second thing is just that the fact that he even remembers the designation in general. Because if you think about it, the ultimate level of not respecting the clones would be to not even remember their numbers, right? Like, yeah, you should probably learn their names that they gave themselves first. But if you're going to ignore that, at least know their designation numbers. And he knows the one out of the 10,000s of clones that he's come across. He knows the one gay one. He knows his number. That's suspicious. That's weird to me that he just remembers that.
Well, see, the thing, Bradley, is that we all have that one coworker who 10 years later, we still fucking hate. And we remember this coworker, and we will remember them for the rest of our lives. It's always like one coworker that we're like, fuck this guy
Right.
specifically. I remember 10 years later how much of a bastard this man was. In my case, it was my boss, and I named a character in Beach House after him because I hated him that much. But we all have that one coworker that we're like, I fucking remember you.
I have to give it to Rampart too because, on the one hand, he's not a dummy. He's definitely going to insist on information for something, right? So this is definitely one of those situations where it's like, I come to you for the information. Well, you need to do a task for me so I can give you that information. And that task right now is get me out of here alive.
Well, see, it's so funny. It's so funny because Rampart thinks he has a degree of control over the situation. He does not. He has no bargaining power here, but he's still trying to bargain. Like, and this is going to be a thing for Rampart for the next 2 episodes. He's going to think he's in control of the situation. He is not. He just flatly isn't, which is hilarious because it's that imperial arrogance. My final note for this segment, we're not talking a lot about the voice cast of this episode because a lot of them are people who have been in Star Wars before, either reprising their roles like Nashir Dalal, or they've just been a voice a bunch in Star Wars like Jonathan LaPalle or Matthew Wood. But I do want to shout out that the Warden is being voiced by Steve Blum, aka the voice of Zeb, and a bunch of voices throughout all of Star Wars.
Oh, that's nice. I didn't know that.
Mm-hmm. He's also the voice of Oghren in Dragon Age Origins. You fucking knew I was going to bring that up.
How did I know that you were going to bring up that? How would I even correlate that person to that game?
You mean my other extreme nerd interest that is not Star Wars? The thing that I spend all of the time in my life that is not thinking about Star Wars thinking about? Yes, he's also in that.
Section 4. As the turbo tank approaches the bridge, Hunter tells Wrecker to man the cannons while the Warden deploys gunships and seals the bridge, realizing the transport is compromised. Hunter plows Transport 1 through the barriers and exchanges fire with Transport 2, ordering Wrecker to disable it with rockets, then accelerates over it. Rampart attempts to grab a blaster but is disarmed and stunned by Crosshair. As stormtroopers board gunships, Transport 1 breaches the second barrier. Crosshair carries Rampart to the cockpit, and Hunter requests a pickup from Phee. Wrecker shoots down one gunship while the second disables the turbo tank's wheel controls before Phee destroys it. She then flies over Transport 1, allowing the clones and Rampart to board before Wrecker jumps off the turbo tank, which falls off a cliff and explodes.
This is all very cool and very well directed.
And this is the pure action sequence. Right
That's my note. That's my only note.
Yeah.
This section and the next section, I only have one note. And my note for here was, this is very cool and pleasurable to watch with my eyeballs.
I agree. I think from the beginning, it was like, okay, how are they going to get across the bridge? How are they going to go against another Juggernaut? How are they going to do all this stuff? And in my brain, I'd like, okay, they're just going to do it.
They're just going to do it because that's what they do.
Yeah, it was great.
Functionally, this is how the Bad Batch works. And they're also, I think it's also notable that they kind of pull this off because up to this point, they've really struggled this season by not having tech. That things happen that they could have used tech for, and they didn't have him. They're kind of learning how to compensate for tech's absence because Hunter is the one who gets the information off the terminal. Wrecker is the one piloting the ship or doing the guns or something. I think Hunter might be driving.
Hunter's driving. Wrecker's got cannons.
Up in the action.
Yeah.
They're doing things that tech
Right.
would have done.
Yeah.
And they're doing them competently. Not as well as tech would have done them, but they are starting to function as a unit without tech, which I think is notable. This is just very excellent direction by Stuart Lee, who is the director of this episode. We talked about him before because he's directed a lot of Star Wars. I did just check what Bad Batch episodes he directed, including Season 1, Episode 1, Aftermath, Season 2, Episode 16, Plan 99. He directed Season 3, Episode 3, Shadows of Tantus, and he's going to direct the finale episode, Season 3, Episode 15.
So a lot of action sequences.
A lot of action sequences and things. He's very good at action sequences. He's directed a bunch of episodes of Clone Wars. He's directed a bunch of episodes of Bad Batch, Resistance, Rebels. Big Star Wars director. He knows what he's doing. And it's clearly evident in this scene because it's really well directed.
Section 5. Safely in space, The Batch confront Rampart, who has woken up. Crosshair demands he uphold his side of the bargain, and Rampart admits he doesn't know the coordinates to the base, but might be able to get them. Back on Tantus, Emery finishes analyzing Omega's blood and reports favorable results to Hemlock. He leads Omega to a heavily guarded vault, explaining that previous replication attempts failed until they combined her sample with other M-count specimens. In the vault, Omega meets 3 children, and Hemlock reveals that they are crucial to their experiments and that this is her new home now.
So the only note I have for this section is that Hemlock is putting Omega in the vault with the other kids. This is a mistake, and he should not be doing this.
I was curious why he didn't just put her back in her cell, like her random
She got
cell.
out of her cell.
That's
so I understand the logic, which is the vault is more secure.
right.
But now the problem is he's put Omega, who has experience escaping the place, with other kids that she can use to escape from the place.
Right. Also, he makes another mistake, which is keeping Emery in the situation with Omega. I feel like he doesn't quite see her. They kind of hinted at it, I think, earlier on in the episode, where she's taking her sample and she's kind of like, are you safe? Like, Omega's like, or I think Emery said something along the lines of like, you're safe here now, or whatever. And then Omega goes, am I safe? And then you kind of see, like you were saying, like you kind of see Emery's kind of facial features being like, oh, well, I mean, I believe the words I'm saying, but I don't technically. And so I feel like here,
it's those micro expressions, baby.
Yeah, I feel like here, like that's his second mistake, is that Emery is still a part of the equation. I think if you were to remove Emery and then remove Omega, like Omega needs to be in complete solidarity, because that's the only thing that would break her spirit, right? That would keep her preventing her from wanting to leave, would be to keep her completely isolated.
That's all my notes on this episode. This episode was written by Ezra W. Nachman. Not a big writer. Hadn't done a whole hell of a lot. His main thing was a show called Manifest, which ran from 2019 to 2023. He was a story editor and a staff writer on 40 episodes of the show. Bradley, what are your final thoughts on this episode?
It was a good, decent action episode. I think they did a great job. I thought, it's very action heavy. Like I said, it doesn't have a lot of emotional story beats, if any, but it's got a good little action sequence. I was actually pretty shocked to find that Rampart was the person that they were going to be getting, and that he was even coming back. It just seemed like something that it was like random. I'm not complaining about it. I think it's actually a great twist of like, oh, how do we find Tantus? Well, we get Rampart. We have to not turn him, but we have to use him. So I think that was a good little surprise, I think, is including Rampart in the final arc of this story. What about you?
This episode was pleasurable to watch with my eyeballs. I thought it was fun to have a nice little action episode before we get into the last 3 episodes, which are all like plot, 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 plot. Especially since we're not really going to do a whole lot of action in the next 2 necessarily. Particularly the next one, how they actually get into Tantus. So I think that it was important to show the Batch working together. I think it was important to show their competency. I think it was important to show them doing something that's very in their element before they're going to take on this final boss at Tantus base and get Omega back. All right, next week we are covering Season 3, Episode 13, titled something. I don't know.
Into the Breach.
Into the Breach. Bradley has it.
Yes.
Bradley anticipates at this point I'm not going to know what the
I literally write it at the end of all my notes now, because I know you're going to say it and you're not going to know it. And
you're going to say it and then you're going to blank and you're going to fuck off. Okay. Pluggables. Bradley works in reality TV. We promote one at a time. Right now we're doing The Circle, Season 6 on Netflix. I also do, as previously mentioned, a show called For Light and Dice, a TTRPG set in the High Republic. Chris, who I was taking snipes at through this episode, is the DM, but other cast members include Hope from J Guys and Jedi, Jess from RuPaul's Pod Race, Colton from Nerdsmith, and our friend Robin. I also write gay mystery thriller novels. You can find them on Amazon Kindle. The series is called Beach House Studios. Beach House is one word, one H. And Bradley, we're in the home stretch. We got 3 episodes to go.
Let's do it.
Let's run our socials. Thank you for listening to this episode of Gold Squadron Gaze. Did Charles fuck something up? Email us at goldsquadrongaze@gmail.com to let us know. You can also find us on Twitter at Gold Squad Gaze, and you can find us on TikTok and Instagram at Gold Squadron Gaze. You can also find us on YouTube at our Gold Squadron Gaze YouTube channel, where we post full episodes of this show. Finally, if you liked the show, don't forget to rate us and give us a review on your favorite podcast platform. That allows other people to find our show. As always, thank you for listening to Gold Squadron Gaze, and we'll see you next week. So instead, we have to talk about literally something else that's not the Veilguard. Because I'm trying to convince Bradley to play the Veilguard, but it's not on Switch.
Yeah, and
So
doesn't
he
interest
can't
me
play it.
in any shape or form.
But it's so gay, Bradley. You can fuck the old man. I'm gonna fuck the old man.
Don't care about that, honestly. I'd rather go farming in my Disney village or something, like whatever I have on my Switch.
You're saying you don't want to live in an oppressive fantasy world where everything is bad constantly all of the time for centuries on end?
No, I'm fine with just
Does
talking
living-
Ariel and just decorating a house and live my best life with Wally. Like that's what I'm doing right now.
Well, I guess there goes my dream of transitioning us over to a Dragon Age podcast. I guess we're gonna have to talk about fucking Star Wars instead.